Ladies and gentlemen, from Formula One, Formula Drift, and a rider herself, please welcome to the Dealer Evolution stage, Laurette Nicoll.
Thanks, Lee. Hello, everyone. Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hello. How are you guys? It's so good to see you. Come and hang out with us. Come sit with us. Our AMA friends. They're going to come and have a seat. If you can hear the sound of my voice, amazing. I would love for you to come have a seat and join us here at this panel, because what we are going to be talking about is the state of the industry in the US and in Canada, as well as priority issues such as PFAS, chemical bans, tariffs, and other government policies. And you must be thinking, well, how does it affect me? I can promise you it does, and you do not want to miss this panel. So it is my honor to introduce to you Scott Schloegel. Come on over, Scott. He is our Senior Vice President, Government Relations, gingerly making his way up as he's recovering. Landon French, President and CEO, Moto Canada. And of course, we have Makarios. I got it. Makarios, owner of JKM Consulting. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Please have a seat. So, Scott, I would like to start with you because we had a call in early December about the most pressing issues, and this is so important because it affects everybody. And Scott, let's first talk about the bills that are introduced and how your team goes through all of that.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you for having us here today for this. You're absolutely right. Government relations, while it may not be everybody's favorite topic,
Sure.
will impact you sooner or later, right? So it's a matter of whether you're kind of early on in that impact or if you're later. So dealers tend to be on the far end of it. And there are about 190,000 bills that we tracked last year. Of those, about 16.6 thousand of them were at the state level. The rest of them were at the federal level. The rest of them were in the 50 states that we track. So we have a team of 9 folks in the Government Relations Office who look at these bills every day. We have a very expensive, tens of thousands of dollars system that we have in place that kind of combs through every single bill that's introduced in each state, as well as at the federal level. We get alerts on a daily basis. That team then goes through each one of those alerts to see what the relevance is to our industry. And as you mentioned, it could be anything from PFAS to right to repair to public lands access to any host of issues, tariffs, and other issues that are out there. So.
Yeah, and those are 3 of the biggest issues that are facing us that we're going to talk about, so we can get you some answers on that. Before we do that, Kyle, I wanted to talk to you about your company and your responsibilities and how we got you involved with this panel.
Thanks, Laurette. I'm Kyle Makarios, and I'm the Motorcycle Industry Council lobbyist in the state of Minnesota. So my job is to monitor the 3,400 some bills that were introduced last year, and then we had a big project to fix a couple of problems that a previous legislature caused for our industry. I'll just jump right into that story. In 2022, Minnesota's a purple state, swings back and forth. In 2022, the Democrats swept the elections, and so they come into the 2023 legislative session with control of the House, control of the Senate, and then you may have heard of our governor, he's been in the news the last couple of days, Tim Walz, with what they think is a mandate. And so they pass all sorts of sweeping legislation, including sweeping environmental legislation that included a ban on PFAS in manufactured products that takes full effect in 2032. But part of that ban that took immediate effect January 1st last year, 2025, was a ban on PFAS in youth products. And the good folks at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency determined that juvenile products included youth-sized snowmobiles, motorcycles, and ATVs. And so we found out about this because the Pollution Control Agency started telling our dealers in Minnesota that they could not sell, January 1st a year ago, youth-sized products to consumers in the state of Minnesota. And so we had to go in last year and fix that and properly define juvenile products to exclude power sports industry complex products. So we were able to do that, and that, I guess, Laurette, is my role is to kind of watch this stuff at the state level in Minnesota.
Yeah, as you can tell, that is why that is going to start affecting dealerships and dealers if they can't sell the products that are supposed to be on their floors. And gentlemen, we had our first call early December, and we wanted to talk about things that we wanted to accomplish during this panel. And Landon, you jumped in. Your first thoughts were on current confidence levels, consumer confidence levels. Mm-hmm. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, it's, when folks sit down at their kitchen table and look at what they can spend their money on and what they need to spend their money on, the wants versus the needs, the needs are taking more out of the budget these days on both sides of the border. In Canada, that's meant that Canadians are being much more cautious about what they're spending money on, prudent about those dollars because they're not sure what the future is going to look like. Manufacturing is a huge driver of jobs in Canada. The USMCA free trade agreement between Canada and Mexico and the United States is a backbone of our economy. And when people are not sure about what their jobs are going to be, then they start to pull back on spending. And so things like motorcycles, ATVs, side-by-sides, and so on start to become questions in some cases. Other places, those our vehicles are so important to culture and their way of life that it hasn't had as much of an impact. But the people on the margins and the people whose paychecks are a little bit at risk are definitely pulling back, and we're seeing some of that in the marketplace.
And Canada is a little bit ahead of the U.S. as far as tariffs go. What are you seeing there?
Well, there's a lot happening. It is something that's certainly a very important conversation across the country, not just at the federal level, but at the provincial level, right down to the municipal level. Canada is obviously, with the United States and Mexico, beginning the process of renegotiating the free trade agreement that we currently have. That was agreed to by the current administration 2 administrations ago. And so that process has begun. And I know Scott and his team are working on it here in the United States, and we stay in touch about what's happening on either side of the border. And it's really important for Canada because we don't make any of these vehicles except a few Spyders, and plus some snowmobiles are made in Canada. So we import everything we ride. Some of those vehicles are made in the United States. We have about 8 members, and many of them are here today, that are manufacturing in the United States for the Canadian market. The rest are all made in Asia and Europe. And so Canada is reaching out to other countries to develop new trading relationships with other countries, which is an advantage to Canadian dealers who don't purchase vehicles from the United States directly. So if the USMCA changes significantly, then there's going to be a big advantage to purchasing vehicles from Asia or Europe, and that's where the direction's going to change. So our dealers are watching this very carefully across the country, and there's a lot of jobs. There's in Canada, we're 42 million people, about 100,000 jobs are tied to our industry directly, and so we're watching it very carefully and participating on both sides of the border in the conversation.
Do you think that there's flexibility for the OEMs or in retail?
Well, the challenge has been over the last year that a lot of the, so as the tariffs go up, the margins shrink, or you raise prices. Those are really your 2 choices. And the OEMs to this point have generally not wanted to increase prices because that has a knock-on effect on a variety of other things. Plus, if your competitor is not part of that same USMCA trade agreement and they're bringing vehicles in from Asia or Europe, then they're not having the same margin pressure that your vehicle is from the United States. So they're really been trying to hold prices. They've been trying to absorb that margin themselves as OEMs and not put that burden on the dealers and the customers. But that flexibility can only take them so far and burns through their cash. So we're starting to see them come to the end of that soon. And, that's why it's so important that we all get involved in this conversation, talk to your local politicians and let them know what the impact is on what's happening on either side of the border.
Absolutely. And Scott, do you have anything else to add about tariffs and trade?
I got a lot to add about tariffs and trade.
I saw that smile.
So yeah, I mean, what we've seen, and particularly for the dealers out there, it doesn't matter if you're an OE, an aftermarket company, or a dealer, the tariffs are going to impact you and have started to impact you. So just by way of background, to kind of give you the different buckets that the tariffs have gone into, we're looking at kind of 4 different buckets for tariffs. The first is one that Landon has referred to, and it's not the U.S. Motorcycle Coaching Association. It's the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the tariffs that are the agreement that govern kind of the North American, U.S., Mexico, and Canada tariffs. That's a set tariff that's been put in place for a number of years. It's under review this year to see whether or not changes are going to be made to it, and so we'll be following that closely. Second bucket that you have is what we call the IEEPA tariffs. This was the International Emergency Action something or other tariffs, but these are the ones that when the president came in place, he put on basically everybody else, right? These were the reciprocal tariffs, he referred to them as. So those are tariffs that were being put onto every other country or most of the other countries around the world. That's been under review by the U.S. Supreme Court. They had a hearing back in October on it. They are expected to rule as early as the next week or two on it, maybe going into February, as to whether or not those tariffs were legal and whether or not the president can continue to move forward and implement those tariffs on the other countries. If they rule that they're not legal, which we think they probably will, just based on the way that the hearing went, that could mean any number of things. It could mean that they stop the tariffs immediately. The president has said that if they if they rule that those were illegal, he's going to go to another tariff basis that he can use. It would be much shorter. That can only be implemented for another 45 days, so it wouldn't be as permanent as the current IEEPA tariffs are. The other aspect is that there may be refunds that would be issued to the folks who were importing and under those tariffs. Third bucket and fourth bucket are what we call Section 301 and Section 232 tariffs. These are ones where there's a formal process that they go through. Excuse me. And the steel and aluminum tariffs are being done under the 232 process. A lot of others are being done under the Section 301 process. And those are opportunities for us to weigh in throughout that process on what the impacts could be to our industry and to ask for exclusion from those tariffs. And so in his first term, we were successful in getting a number of exclusions put in place on products, whether it was aftermarket parts, whether it was replacement parts, whether it was helmets in some respects. We were able to get some of the HTS codes for helmets that were being imported excluded. But again, all 4 of those buckets and tariffs that are being implemented under there cut into the margins of the OEs, which then cuts into the margins if they pass that along to the dealerships. And it means just basically everything becomes more expensive. And so we continue to track these and fight against them, and to the extent that we can request to be excluded from them, we are doing that on a regular basis. But this is where all of you in the audience, your input to us is super, super important. For you guys to tell us what the impact is and what your sales impact has been as a result of the tariffs is really important information for us to have.
Yeah. How would they deliver that info to you?
So you can reach out to me, or you can send it to our government relations office directly at MIC, Motorcycle Industry Council, MIC GR, Government Relations, at mic.org. So okay. MICGR at mic.org.
Okay. And so for you folks that are in the audience, Scott's going to be over on the side. So if you didn't catch that, we'll make sure that we introduce you to Scott and we can get you that information. Scott, we're talking a lot about tariffs, which is One of the top three facing topics that are really impacting the industry, and another one is PFAS and right to repair. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So right to repair is really important for OEs and dealers. Right to repair language would essentially say that you have to provide anybody the information to get into your motorcycles and to be able to repair motorcycles, and to provide at no cost in most instances to anyone the codes and the information that is typically controlled by the dealers and the OEs. So dealers who have vehicles that you sell, if you sell a motorcycle, an ATV, a side-by-side, that thing is under warranty. Instead of having to come to you for the warranty work, they could go anywhere, or they could just weekend wrench it and do it themselves. Sure. And we all know that if you've got a bike right now, I've got a bike, for example, there's not a my branded dealer that is near my house that I have that at. And so if I do my own oil change on it, I can go online and I can find out how to reset the code and clear that out. But for folks who are dealers, as the margins become thinner and thinner because of the tariff issue in particular, they're already not making a lot of money on selling the bikes, and you're making it on the service afterwards and your other accessories and things like that. So really important for us to kind of oppose that. There's actually going to be a hearing. Just this morning we got notice of a hearing that's going to happen next week in Congress on that on the House side. So that's really important for us to kind of stay on top of and be out front on. With regard to PFAS chemicals, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, PFAS is perfluoral and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are chemicals that are thousands of chemicals within the PFAS family. You've got two different kind of buckets that they fall into. One is PFAS that partition to water, stuff that is water soluble, and stuff that is polymerized PFAS. And when you think about kind of that definition, if this bottle of water, if the lid was off of it, the stuff that partitions to water would be able to go right into that, enter into the cells of your body, get into other things. And PFAS chemicals, if you have them in large quantities, they can cause cancer, and they are bad. So, we are understanding of the fact that we need to transition away from PFAS chemicals. Most of the PFAS chemicals that we have in our products, and think about your gaskets, your hoses, your valve stems, your bump stops, your fluids that are in the vehicle, are polymerized PFAS. These are larger molecules of PFAS that could not enter the mouth of this bottle here. So PFAS chemicals are super, super important. There's been a movement across the country to ban them in various states. Maine was the first to ban them altogether. We were successful in going back in and getting an exclusion in Maine for our Powersports vehicles, so we feel very good about that. In Minnesota, they were the next ones to pass that. That's when we hired Kyle to make sure that we had somebody there to represent us on behalf of that issue. And as Kyle mentioned, there are bans on PFAS in juvenile products. In this instance, that's what Minnesota was banning at the 1st of January last year. And in that instance, we were able to, again, go in there. It took us several months to get it done, but to successfully get an exclusion for our youth ATVs. When they're thinking of youth products, they're thinking of things like pacifiers and toys and other things that kids can put in their mouth, curtains, drapes, carpeting. So you'll see PFAS bans that are banning it in juvenile products, in textiles. So when they start banning it in textiles, that means that the waterproofing and sweat wicking technologies that are in your clothing that a lot of the dealers are selling or aftermarket folks are selling, the jackets, the water repellency, it's super important for that. So as they do textile bans, that impacts our products as well. Then there's all-out bans that they have, and just saying in Minnesota, for example, in 2032, we will no longer be able to sell anything with PFAS in it, and that's going to be problematic as well. So, most of the dealers that I talked to about PFAS were like, what do we need to worry about PFAS chemicals? That's not us. And really, it's on the manufacturing side. True, but we're the early warning buoys that are out there in the ocean as this tsunami is rolling toward the shore. And you guys are going to be impacted by it once it hits the shore. So you're seeing in some states where you can't sell certain products, You're also seeing in some states where there's dates coming up that you can't sell certain products. So I would encourage you all to be members of MIC. If you're not a member of, if you are a member of MIC, you can go on to Behind the Paywall and see our report as to what's going on in every single state with PFAS chemicals, what you need to agree with and or abide by, and which ones have dates that are coming up.
Okay. Could you also tell us how extended producer responsibility legislation laws could affect OEs and dealerships?
Sure. So extended producer responsibility, or EPR laws and legislation, are bills that say that you as a end user or as the manufacturer, depending on how the legislation is written, need to comply with essentially recycling standards, right? So it will tell you that in California, for example, here, if you're selling textiles, you have to be able to take those textiles back and have them disposed of in an environmental way. In certain states, it's motor vehicles themselves have to be disposed of in a certain way. It could be batteries that are in those vehicles have to be disposed of in a certain way. It could be the packaging that motorcycle comes in has to be disposed of in a specific way and can't contain certain chemicals and things like that. So really, as PFAS kind of has come along, EPR is a very close relative to that, where they're saying, okay, if you have stuff that has PFAS in it, it needs to be disposed of in a certain way. Or if you have just even packaging materials, that needs to be disposed of in a certain way. So this is something that most folks are not paying attention to right now. It's been about a year and a half that the EPR legislation has been kind of making its way across various states and at the federal level. And we continue to monitor that and advocate for the smallest impact on our manufacturers, dealers, distributors as possible.
Okay. And public land access is also a pressing issue. So if you could mention your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so public lands access, right? For every vehicle that is sold, unless you've got some big ranch or estate or something like that you can ride that on, public lands are absolutely critical to our manufacturers and our dealers, because you need somewhere to ride these vehicles. Particularly out west here, you're really blessed with a lot of areas, a lot of states, a lot of federal lands that are out there. We have seen over the past year where there was a movement to sell off big chunks of federal land and make those private lands rather than having them as public. We oppose that, and we look for ways that we can work with them to minimize the loss of any federal lands, or if they sell off federal lands, that they need to use that money to develop trails in new federal land areas. The other is you have, like during the Biden administration, there was a movement to sell off or to close certain lands. We actually advocated during our fly-in against that, and the Congress voted recently to undo that ban on those federal lands. So super important for us. We see it both at the macro level, at the federal level, but also at the state level. And so in states, you see where there's various lands that can't be used. Like Kyle, in Minnesota, you're working on one of the bills for us that opposes some restrictions there.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Minnesota, of course, has tons of public lands, and in northern Minnesota, there's actually an awesome network of trails that are available to the public to enjoy the outdoors and use our Powersports products. But it's limited to 2,000 pounds. And so it's one of the most restrictive weight restrictions in the country. And so we've been working, and I think got a decent shot to get over the finish line this spring to raise that to 3,000 pounds, so that those trails can be used by heavier side-by-sides and electric vehicles and the products that people prefer these days.
And Kyle, that's the legislation that you're working on now, moving the needle from 2,000 to 3,000 pounds?
That's exactly right. We want to change Minnesota state law to allow vehicles up to 3,000 pounds on trails and public lands.
How's it going?
We made good progress last year. Our bill passed the Senate and got held up in the House of Representatives. Minnesota has a really unique and challenging situation right now in our House of Representatives in that we have 134 members of the House, and currently it's tied 67-67.
Wow.
Right? So the only state in the country where you got a tied legislature, which means it's really hard to get anything done because you have to basically have consensus on both sides. Neither one of them is going to allow one person or two people to break off and vote with the other team. So it's like this trench warfare going on in Minnesota. And so in order to get it done, we're basically going to have to be part of some deal where the people who are opposed to raising that weight are going to get something in exchange for that. And it's all complicated horse trading. But I think we got a decent chance at getting over the finish line this spring.
Okay, fingers crossed.
Yeah, and that's, here's how you achieve that, right? Is that in Minnesota, you've got Polaris, a huge manufacturer, big footprint in the state. You've got Articat manufacturing and backup and manufacturing in the state, which is great. Then you get the rider groups together, and then Kyle and I go in there and talk to the legislators about it. And then you have those dealers, the rider groups, the manufacturers all also weigh in with those elected officials, and that's how you're able to have some good success there.
Yeah, and Landon, in Canada, how do they do the public lands access?
It's different right now. Certainly, there are more national parks on the books. So this Prime Minister has said he plans to protect 30 more national parks in Canada.
Okay.
And in Canada, our national parks exclude motorsports. So while this is currently public land, it will become a national park. And there may be uses there that are allowable for our vehicles, but if they become a national park, that means that usage stops. So we're working hard in Ottawa and across the country to make sure that we continue to have access to these lands and that our friends who want to come up from the United States have a place to ride if they want to ride in those areas. Other than that, province by province across the country has their own different network and their own different set of regulations. So it's the same sort of game. The one big difference is that we don't have the same funding support that you enjoy here in the United States, and I think the MIC and your colleagues have had a great deal to do with getting federal money to build a trail network and support it across the country, and that is something that we're working on in Canada too.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yep.
That sounds like such a viable and incredible option to have it.
We've got the room.
Yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
let's build the network.
Yeah. It sounds like we need to get a legislator on a bike in Canada.
Yes.
Or like lawmakers.
There's lots of those. We're working on that for sure.
I'm sure you are. Gentlemen, how can AIMExpo attendees help you help the industry? Scott, I'm going to start with you on that.
Sure, yeah. So many ways. First and foremost, be a member of MIC, right? Be a dues-paying member. That helps us. I mentioned the super expensive legislative tracking system that we have, the staff that we have, the other outreach and travel that we have to do are super important. Sign up for our ride report. Our ride report is, if you're not getting it right now, every Wednesday, our communications team puts out a ride report. You can scan that QR code up on the screen right now if you're not currently receiving it, and we can send that out to you. But that gives you weekly updates as to what the priority issues are that we're working on, and gives us an opportunity to push out to you what the priorities and the latest kind of urgent things are going on. The other thing we can do is that we do these blast emails to you if there's an urgent thing that's happening and there's a bill that's going to be heard, whether it's in your state or at the federal level, so that you can then go in. We make it really easy. You can just click on it, do a couple clicks, and send a letter off to your legislator. You don't even need to know who your legislator is at that point. So that's one way to do it. Another is to join the MIC as an individual member and contribute to our PAC, our Political Action Committee, so that we can then help support those elected officials who support us, right? So I talked about a big win that we got up in Utah recently with regard to public lands that they reopened recently, and that was Senator John Curtis and Senator Lee, but Senator Curtis in particular, a big ally of the Powersports community, does great work for us, does a lot for us, and then we help him out in his campaign, and we help other folks out in their campaign. So that's another way that you can do it. The third way that you can help us out is by meeting your elected officials, your local elected officials, whether they're state officials or congressional representatives, and invite them out to your facility, whether it's a dealership, a manufacturing facility, a distribution site,
Club.
club.
What did you say, Landon?
I just said the club, the riders' clubs are so important, and that's a lot of votes that are there as well. So between the dealerships and the clubs, there's a lot of people who can have a lot of influence.
But if you invite your elected officials to come to your facility and see the local impact of what's going on, for anyone who was here earlier during the couple of CEOs that we had up here on stage, they talked about the importance of this as well, right? And the importance of getting folks out to your facility. Once they see your facility, then they know the local jobs that are supported. They know the money that's generated, whether it's tax revenue or the salaries that are paid to your employees and things like that. Plus, they have then an idea as to what it is that the power sports community does. Not everybody rides motorcycle, ATV, side by side. So, they might be a kayaker. Even if you're somebody who's... if you don't agree with them politically, and I got plenty of folks that I don't agree with politically, but you still invite them out to your facility so that they can see that, so that you have some sort of a relationship. Because then when something comes up, whether that's right to repair or the public lands access or PFAS chemicals, you can reach out to them and say, hey, remember all those jobs that you saw at our facility? They're going to be impacted by this, and let me tell you how they're going to be negatively impacted. So that's another way to do it. And the last way I would say is to come to our fly-in that we do every year. And I'm happy to talk more about that if you'd like.
So listening to all these ideas about getting your local lawmakers into your business, for me, sounds like, that's such a great idea. But how would I do that? Do I walk into City Hall? Do I, how do I extend that invitation to someone? How do I find them?
Yep. So a couple of ways that you can do that. One is you could just kind of Google who is my, put in your address and Google who's my member of Congress, who's my state representative, who's my state senator, U.S. senators, because they're for the entire state. If you don't want to do that and you want to just reach out to our government relations office and ask us for help, we're more than happy to do that. We can help to reach out to the elected officials' office, say to them, hey, we've got a constituent in your district who'd like to meet with you. I will tell you that in August, for example, the members of Congress are on district work period, they call it. And so usually for almost the entire month of August, members of Congress are back in their district. Perfect time to bring them into your facility and show them around, show them what it is that you're doing there. So you can either do a Google search on it, you can reach out to our office, we're happy to set you up. And then don't forget about your state elected officials and even the local officials. Think of them as the farm team, right? These are the folks who are going to be moving up to probably a state office role, and then when a congressional seat opens up or a governorship opens up, they're going to be moving up there. And I talked a little bit about our fly-in. The congressional fly-in that we do is going to be happening May 18th and 19th, and it's out in Washington, D.C. What you do is you register for it. You tell us that you're going to be coming out there. Our staff puts together all the meetings for you. So we do a nice little reception the first night when you get to DC, and we have a nice dinner. We talk about the issues that we're going to be discussing while we're on the Hill. We put up videos that are out on YouTube for you to watch so that you can become familiar with the issues that we're advocating for or against during that fly-in. We also put up videos to kind of show you a mock meeting with a member of Congress, another video for a mock meeting with a staff person. So we make it really easy. I think it was John Hines from KTM talked about earlier how we make it really easy for folks when they come out to the fly-in. All you do is you register, tell us the zip codes of where you've got your facilities. We'll schedule the meetings with your member of Congress or their staff and get that all set up, and then we'll come back and do another meeting with we'll put you in other meetings as well so that you can kind of see how all of that is taking place. So super easy. So first night, nice little reception, talk about the issues. The next day we have a breakfast. We typically have several members of the House and or Senate that will come over and speak to us, as well as DC insiders to talk about issues. And then you go off and you do your meetings, and then that night we have a nice reception afterwards as well. So,
will you be joining us all the way from Canada?
I was there last year.
Yep.
Had a great time. Learned a lot about the process.
Okay.
Got our issues on the agenda as well, talking about all the things that are important on both sides of the border, and highly recommend it. Look forward to going back. Okay.
Kyle, will you be able to join us at the fly-in?
I did my tour of duty in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, and I'm really glad I'm doing there. So I'm holding down the fort in St. Paul, Minnesota. But I just to pile on what Scott said, I mean, it really is a big deal. for people to know their own local legislators. When we were dealing with this youth products ban, we had bills introduced to fix the problem before I ever even talked to them, and it's because their local dealer just called their legislator and said, the Pollution Control Agency just told me I can't sell a youth-sized snowmobile. Like, what the heck is going on? Yeah. And you know, and their local legislators like jumped on it. They're like, that is outrageous. I'm going to change the law to make it clear that we're going to do this. And so it just makes such a huge difference that for you know, this one particular legislator outside of Duluth, Minnesota. She knew her local dealer, and they called her up, and she was on it. And so she became one of our champions, and you know, we put the team together. But it's a really big deal to know your legislators.
Yeah, tucked into that same environmental bill was a ban on certain levels of lead and cadmium in keys, which included bladed keys as well as key fobs. And so the solder that was in the key fobs was typically in excess of the lead or cadmium levels. And so that was another thing that Kyle worked on with us to get changed. And you know, this happened to be where one of the, he talked about how in the House, 50-50 tie, neither side wants to give the other side any votes at all. But we had one elected official, and she owned several Battery Plus stores in her district. She owned them. They did a lot of work with keys and selling keys, and we were like, you know, you're selling illegal keys right now based on the law that you guys passed last year that went into effect immediately. Essentially, every vehicle that was being sold in Minnesota at the time had an illegal key in it.
Wow.
And so,
I mean, every key in your pocket last year in Minnesota would have been illegal. Every single one of them. They didn't know what they were doing. They passed the law. It went so fast. Nobody, you know, was watching. They just stuck keys in there. They wanted to ban lead in children's products, which makes sense, right? So you can't lead in jewelry, lead in art supplies, lead in fidget spinners. Okay, and they just stuck keys on there because sometimes kids put keys in their mouth. So and then nobody, you know, and then it's law 5 minutes later, and the level that they said you can't have lead in over 0.09% lead by weight, and there's not a key in America. You know, they all have brass in them. They all got a little bit of lead, and they basically outlawed all keys in the state. So we had to overturn the key ban last year.
but that's just it, right? So you have an elected official there who has both a financial interest as well as a constituent interest, and that's how you get things done. So this is where anytime any of you all, if you do reach out and you have your elected officials come to your facility, let us know about it. Take some pictures. You'll get a free hit on it as well. I'll give you another example. Judd Hollyfield, who owns Reinhardt Racing, great exhaust systems that go on, aftermarket exhaust systems. He's been coming to our fly-in for years and years. So Judd had a meeting with his congressman, who was a guy named Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows represented a district that was very Republican and ended up becoming President Trump's chief of staff in the first administration. So after Judd met with him in his office during our fly-in, the congressman said, I want to come see your facility. I want to see 100% American-made products that they're doing with American steel and aluminum, which, by the way, the prices went up on that as the prices went up on the imported stuff as well. And so he was able to talk to the congressman about that. But then the congressman came out to his facility. They did a big thing on the news about how the congressman was there at the facility. The workers all got to see him. The congressman got to talk to their folks. And then he becomes the chief of staff to the president of the United States. And now you've got a voice that you can reach, somebody that you can reach out to who is a friend of our industry to talk to about that stuff. So that's just another example of how, whether you're inviting them out to your facility or you're coming to our fly-in and then inviting them out to your facility, really, really a huge impact for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely, because it can turn into a friendly relationship. So gentlemen, to close, how early do you think dealers have to get involved to help block bills that negatively impact their business?
It can't start soon enough. I mean, I'll just say one quick thing, and then I'll leave it to the two or local experts, which is, you stand at the front door of your dealership, and you just look around at how many places government touches your business. And try not to get totally overwhelmed by that thought. And then pick your priorities and where you really need to spend your time and your money and where they're having the biggest impact as you've heard, they can bring in a legislation or a bill pretty quickly that can have a big impact on your business. In some ways, I feel like they're the biggest competitor we have in our business because there's so much regulation in our industry along with others. So you've got great tools here through the MIC to work with, but it's so important to have your local relationships and have that radar for the bills and legislation that's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, you guys are all super busy selling vehicles, maintaining them, doing the things that you need to do to make sure that your business survives. And that's why it's really important to be a member of the MIC and why it's important for us to be sharing with you what those priorities are and what the key issues are that are coming up. So, I'm not going to expect that as soon as a bill is introduced, you all are going to be weighing in on something. But when we raise it to you, if you're on our email list and we email something to you saying, hey, this is a big issue, and if you recognize that it's a big issue for you, it makes it super easy. You're too busy to be tracking legislation. That's what we do. You're too busy to be writing a letter about that stuff unless you really want to. That's why we provide you with that pre-written letter that you can then edit and tweak a little bit and put your own spin on it and click a button and send it off. So really getting involved as soon as possible is absolutely correct. To the extent you don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that, as soon as you hear from us and you get an alert from us, if you can respond to that alert, even though you're super busy, we are cognizant of how busy you are and try to make it as simple as possible for you to advocate to help back us up in our efforts.
Absolutely. Kyle, anything to add?
I just say, legislators want to know business owners that live in their districts too. So it's not like they're going out of their way to come see your facility. And also, your facilities are really cool. And so a legislator that doesn't know anything about Powersports is going to have a really good time just coming and spending half an hour looking at the new model and understanding what you do in your business. And they're going to remember it. And then when we do need them down the road and there's something going on that's important, they're going to remember that they came over there. And when you call them up, they're going to remember you. And they're going to take it seriously because, you're important constituents because, you own an important business in their district.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been an eye-opening panel and so important. Thank you for all the hard work that you do for all of us here at the motorcycle industry. The gentleman will be here for just a few more minutes, and if you needed to get some contact information from Scott, please feel free to do that. So thank you again, Scott Schloegel, Landon French, and Kyle Makarios. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.